Long before the age of human dominance, before the flags of Earth flew across the stars, there were others who ruled the galaxy with iron power. They were known as the Alphas. The Alphas were not just another species. They were the first and the strongest, the masters of the void, and the feared lords of countless systems. To speak their name was to speak of fear. They built cities the size of moons, ships larger than mountains, and weapons that could burn entire worlds to ash. Across the stars, no one dared to resist them. They were seen as gods walking among mortals, a race untouchable and unbreakable. For generations, they commanded respect through fear, forcing weaker species to bow, to serve, and to accept their place as shadows under Alpha rule. To many, it felt like the Alphas would last forever, like no hand could ever move them from their throne. But today, their name is nothing but dust. No statues remain, no ships drift in orbit, no world carries their banners. They are gone, vanished as if history itself chose to forget them. And yet, whispers remain. Stories told in secret, legends hidden in forgotten archives, tales of a time when the Alphas ruled above all. But those who dare to ask, those who dare to dig deeper, always find the same chilling truth. It was not time, not nature, not war between equals that ended them. It was humanity. The same species once dismissed as weak, fragile, and unworthy of galactic notice, became the very force that brought the Alphas to their knees. How could such a thing happen? How could the mighty Alphas, the rulers of the stars, fall to a young race that had barely learned how to sail between the planets? That mystery is what makes their story so dangerous, so terrifying, and so unforgettable. The Alphas believed they were unchallenged. They believed their power was eternal, their rule everlasting. Their arrogance blinded them to the storm quietly growing beyond their sight. A storm that wore the face of humanity. The Alphas had seen empires rise and fall, but they never imagined that one day a race from a small blue planet, a world they once ignored, would be the architects of their extinction. Now, the galaxy is silent about them. Records erased. Monuments destroyed. Entire histories rewritten. Humanity did not just defeat the Alphas. Humanity erased them. And when a species can erase the strongest rulers the galaxy has ever known, the question that lingers in the shadows is simple. Who will stop humanity if they choose to do it again? To understand this, we must look back. We must travel to the age when the Alphas stood at the height of their reign. When their fleets spread like storms across the stars. When their roar silenced entire civilizations. And we must see how their pride became their downfall, and how the weakest of all, the forgotten humans, became the executioners of legends. This is not a tale of peace. This is not a tale of mercy. This is the tale of the fall of the Alphas, and the relentless rise of humanity. The Alphas were not born rulers of the galaxy, but their rise was faster, sharper, and far more brutal than any other species could ever imagine. In the beginning, they were just another young race, hungry for survival, fighting wars on their own homeworld to claim dominance over each other. But unlike weaker species, the Alphas never stopped fighting. For them, war was not just survival, it was nature, it was culture, it was identity. To be Alpha meant to conquer, and to conquer meant to live. When they first reached the stars, they did not come in peace like many races did. They did not search for allies or friends. They came with fleets of fire and iron, crushing those they met, stripping worlds of resources, and enslaving entire populations. To the Alphas, there were only two choices for every new species they encountered: submit or burn. Those who resisted were erased. Entire civilizations disappeared in the wake of Alpha fleets, their names forgotten, their cultures buried under the shadow of Alpha might. Those who submitted lived, but only as servants, their lives nothing more than tools for the Empire. This method of ruling spread fear across the galaxy, and fear was the Alpha's favorite weapon. No species could match their ships, no weapon could pierce their armor, and no army could stand against their disciplined legions. They built fleets so massive that when they moved across the stars, they looked like storms swallowing the light. They built stations that circled suns and forges that never slept. Other races whispered their name in terror, never daring to speak against them, never daring to imagine a day without their rule. The Alphas thought themselves eternal. They believed they had achieved what no other race could, control over destiny itself. And in many ways, they had. For thousands of years, no one dared to resist. No one dreamed of rebellion. The galaxy belonged to them, and to resist meant certain death. To the young races, they were gods of war, lords of flame, unshakable and undefeatable. Yet hidden beneath all this power was a weakness they refused to see. The Alphas had grown comfortable in their throne. They believed themselves untouchable, so much so that arrogance blinded their sight. When a new species rose, one too weak to matter, they dismissed it. They ignored the whispers of humanity's first steps into space, ignored the warnings of their scouts, ignored the tiny victories of a race that did not know when to stop fighting. The Alphas laughed at humans, calling them insects crawling out of their cradle, nothing more than children playing with fire. And yet, those same children would one day strike the blow that shattered Alpha pride forever. But in this age, at the height of their reign, the Alphas had no fear. They had no doubts. They ruled as predators do, hunting, killing, and taking what they wanted. They had built their empire on fear, and as long as the galaxy trembled before them, they believed nothing could bring them down. Their rise was built on war, their throne built on ashes, and their legacy written in blood. To them, that was strength. To them, that was destiny. And to those who lived under their rule, the idea of freedom was nothing but a forgotten dream. When the Alphas first heard the name of humanity, they barely noticed it, for in their eyes humans were nothing, a young race from a small blue planet on the edge of a quiet spiral arm, too weak to matter and too fragile to threaten the throne of giants. Yet history remembers that the greatest storms often begin as whispers, and humanity's whisper would one day become the roar that shook the stars. The first encounters were not grand battles, nor were they dramatic confrontations. Instead, they were simple accidents of exploration, for human ships, small and slow, stumbled into Alpha-controlled space, driven not by power but by curiosity, not by greed but by the restless urge to explore. When Alpha scouts caught sight of the first human vessel, they laughed at its design, at its fragile hull, at its primitive engines, and they reported back to their masters that this species was no danger, no rival, no future. To the Alphas, humanity was nothing more than a child stepping onto a battlefield with wooden sticks while armies of steel and fire surrounded them. But what the Alphas failed to see, what their arrogance blinded them from, was the strange nature of humanity, a nature unlike any they had conquered before. Humans did not stop when they were told they were weak, they did not bow when threatened, and they did not break when crushed. Every defeat only made them adapt, every loss only made them grow sharper, stronger, and more determined. When the Alphas first demanded that humans kneel, humanity refused. When the Alphas showed them the power of fleets, humanity built ships faster than before. When the Alphas unleashed their armies, humanity fought not with strength but with cunning, using every weakness, every shadow, every flaw they could find. The Alphas could not understand this. To them, strength was measured in firepower and size, but humans fought with something else, something invisible and far more dangerous. They fought with will, with imagination, with the ability to see not just what was, but what could be. The first skirmish between the two was small, almost forgotten by Alpha history, for they saw it as meaningless. A single Alpha ship chased a small human vessel through the void, but instead of running endlessly, the humans laid a trap, luring the massive Alpha ship into a dense asteroid field. With clever navigation and desperate tactics, they caused the larger ship to collide, shattering it into burning fragments. To the Alphas, it was an accident. To the humans, it was proof that even giants could fall. That single event spread through human fleets like fire, and for the first time, they believed they could fight back. More encounters followed, more skirmishes at the edges of Alpha territory, and each time humanity learned, adapted, and grew bolder. The Alphas still mocked them, still dismissed them, but deep inside, a seed of doubt was planted. They had fought countless species before, and all had either submitted or perished, but humans were different. They refused to vanish, refused to bend, and refused to stop. What the Alphas did not realize was that by ignoring humanity, they gave them time, and time was humanity's greatest weapon. While the Alphas sat on their throne, drunk on their own glory, humanity worked in silence, building alliances, creating new technologies, and planning for a future where they would no longer be prey but predator. The first contact should have been the end of humanity, just another species crushed under Alpha rule. But instead, it was the beginning of a story that would end with the fall of legends. The turning point came quietly, almost unnoticed at first, for the Alphas were so sure of their dominance that even the smallest signs of change were ignored. Yet in the shadows of battle, humanity's true strength began to reveal itself, a strength the Alphas could never have predicted, and it all started with a single decision that would echo across the galaxy. The humans refused to retreat, refused to surrender, and refused to act like the victims that every other species before them had become. When the Alphas sent their fleets to crush human settlements, expecting easy victories, they were met with cunning, strategy, and unexpected alliances. Human commanders, inexperienced yet daring, began to exploit weaknesses the Alphas had never even considered, attacking from angles thought impossible, setting traps in the void, and turning their smaller numbers into an advantage. One by one, skirmishes that were meant to be minor humiliations for humanity became humiliations for the Alphas instead. News spread across the human fleets like wildfire. The giants were not invincible. The first real shock came during the Battle of the Vale sector, where a fleet of human ships, smaller and slower than anything in the Alpha Armada, used clever maneuvers and hidden asteroid fields to destroy an entire Alpha squadron. The Alphas were stunned, unable to comprehend how such a fragile race could outthink and outmaneuver them. It was not brute force that won the day, but patience, creativity, and the refusal to give up. Each victory, no matter how small, emboldened humanity, and for the first time in Alpha history, doubt crept into the hearts of their commanders. They began to question, to hesitate, to wonder if perhaps their arrogance had been their greatest mistake. Meanwhile, humans continued to learn quickly, studying Alpha tactics, observing their formations, and predicting their movements with astonishing accuracy. What was once impossible now seemed achievable, and every small success created momentum that could not be stopped. But it was not just strategy that made the turning point so devastating. It was also the alliances humanity formed with other races who had long suffered under Alpha rule. Beings who had once hidden in fear now stepped forward, lending ships, knowledge, and courage to a cause they had never imagined possible. The Alphas saw these alliances as weak attempts, but they did not realize that the strength of unity, of shared hope, was a force far more powerful than any weapon they had ever built. Slowly, the tide began to turn. Alpha ships fell one by one to ambushes that seemed almost too clever to be real. Supply lines were cut, communications disrupted, and fear, long a tool of the Alphas, began to creep into their own ranks. The turning point was not marked by a single moment of glory, but by a growing pattern of failure that no Alpha could ignore. For the first time, their dominance was questioned, and questions led to mistakes, mistakes led to loss, and loss led to panic. Humanity had done what no one else could. They had shown the Alphas that even the mighty could bleed, that even the rulers of the stars could fall, and that the smallest spark of resistance could ignite a fire capable of consuming empires. The Alphas' arrogance had built their empire, but it was also the seed of their undoing. They had underestimated humanity, dismissed them as insignificant, and in doing so, they had handed the galaxy's greatest predator the opportunity to rise. By the end of the turning point, the Alphas were no longer untouchable. They were no longer gods. They were simply beings who had failed to see the storm brewing at the edges of their empire, a storm that would not stop until the Alphas themselves were erased from history. And so, with every victory, every clever maneuver, every alliance formed in secret, humanity carved a path from the shadows to the forefront of the galaxy, proving that courage, intelligence, and unyielding determination could topple even the greatest rulers. The stage was set, the lines drawn, and the once unshakable Alphas had finally met a force they could not ignore. The War of Shadows began not with fire and explosions, but with whispers, secret movements, and quiet plans that spread through the galaxy faster than the Alpha fleets could respond. For humanity had learned that to fight giants directly was foolish, but to strike in the darkness, unseen and unpredictable, was how the impossible could become reality, and so they moved like ghosts, small groups of ships slipping through patrols, sabotaging supply lines, intercepting messages, and turning the very knowledge of the Alphas against them, while other species, long crushed under Alpha rule, secretly joined the human cause, lending ships, pilots, and intelligence to a fight they had never dared dream of winning, creating a network of resistance that stretched across systems, and with each act of sabotage, each successful ambush, the Alphas began to feel the first cracks in their empire, though they refused to acknowledge it openly, believing themselves still unbreakable. Yet fear is contagious, and once doubt took root, it spread quickly through even the most loyal commanders, for reports of human victories and rebel cooperation arrived daily, and no amount of intimidation could hide the truth, that a storm was building, one that would not be stopped by mere firepower, and so the Alphas ordered more fleets, larger fleets, hoping overwhelming numbers would crush the insurgents. But humanity had already anticipated this, setting traps and feints that lured massive Alpha ships into minefields, asteroid belts, and gravity wells designed to rip them apart, while human engineers hacked communication channels, feeding false information, creating confusion, and making the Alphas distrust even their own officers. And in the shadows, humans struck again, capturing strategic outposts and turning them into bases of operations, all while maintaining the illusion of being small, weak, and insignificant, because every Alpha who underestimated them would walk straight into disaster, and disaster they did, as fleets that were supposed to annihilate humans were destroyed in ways the Alphas could not imagine, leaving entire squadrons burned out in space, their bodies and pride floating among the stars, a warning that the smallest spark can start a fire too hot to contain. And yet the War of Shadows was more than battles and ambushes, it was psychological, it was terror against arrogance. It was the lesson that intelligence and courage could defeat raw strength, for humans communicated with other oppressed races, spreading hope, sharing knowledge, teaching tactics, and building a coalition so large that even some Alphas began to fear betrayal within their own ranks. And as the war continued, humans adapted constantly, never using the same plan twice, moving unpredictably, striking from unexpected angles, vanishing into space before retaliation could reach them, making the Alphas question everything they thought they knew about war, about strategy, about themselves. And slowly, the once absolute rulers of the galaxy found themselves reacting rather than acting, chasing shadows that led to nowhere, burning resources on endless patrols, and watching helplessly as their authority slipped like sand through their fingers, while humanity grew bolder with each victory, more organized, more confident, more unstoppable, until finally, the War of Shadows became the true test of strength, not measured by fleets or weapons, but by wit, patience, unity, and unbreakable resolve. And the Alphas, who had ruled without opposition for centuries, began to realize the terrifying truth that their time of unquestioned power was ending, that their enemies were not just humans alone, but an entire galaxy rising against them. And as darkness fell over battlefields, both real and imagined, the stars themselves seemed to whisper that a new power was claiming its place, a power that would not be denied. And in that moment, the War of Shadows proved that the smallest spark, fueled by hope and courage, could ignite a fire that even the mightiest cannot extinguish, and humanity, once dismissed as weak and insignificant, moved steadily toward the day when the Alphas, for all their strength and glory, would face the consequences of underestimating a species that refused to bow, refused to surrender, and refused to die. The fall of the Alphas came not in a single moment, but as a wave that swept across the galaxy, crushing everything in its path. For centuries of pride, power, and fear could not withstand the relentless force of a species that had learned, adapted, and grown stronger with every battle. And it began with a slow unraveling of their fleets, once thought unstoppable, now caught in traps, ambushes, and sabotage that humans had carefully planned, striking not just with weapons but with intelligence, strategy, and the willingness to risk everything, while allied species joined the fight openly, lending their strength and numbers to a war that had once seemed hopeless. And the Alphas, who had always believed themselves invincible, began to feel the first real taste of fear. Worlds that had never seen humans before now burned with their ships above. Alpha outposts fell one by one, and entire fleets were destroyed in ways the Alphas could not comprehend, for no amount of size or firepower could stop an enemy that thought faster, moved smarter, and used every weakness against them. And in every battle, the Alphas saw that their control was slipping, that obedience and fear no longer held sway, and that the galaxy they had ruled for so long was turning against them. The first major loss was on the planet Varnes, where the Alpha High Fleet gathered to crush a growing human settlement, expecting an easy victory. But humans used the planet's terrain, its magnetic storms, and the clever placement of hidden cannons to destroy the fleet completely, leaving the Alphas shocked and humiliated. unable to understand how such a small species could achieve what entire civilizations had failed to do for centuries. Panic spread through the Alpha Command as reports of defeats arrived from every corner of their empire. Communications failed, orders went unanswered, and fear, long a weapon for the Alphas, now became their own enemy, spreading confusion and doubt through their ranks. Even the greatest Alpha generals, once legends among their people, began to hesitate, second-guessing decisions, knowing that every misstep could lead to disaster, and disaster came quickly, for humans and their allies struck with precision, cutting supply lines, capturing command centers, and forcing the Alphas to fight on multiple fronts simultaneously, never giving them a moment to regroup or retaliate effectively. The once proud Alpha homeworld, a planet of shining towers and weapons beyond imagining, was not spared, for human fleets, using stealth technology, strike teams, and coordinated attacks with allied species, infiltrated the surface, sabotaged defenses, and left the Alpha rulers powerless to stop the invasion, while civilians, once protected by fear, rose in rebellion, helping humanity topple the last symbols of Alpha control. The fall became inevitable as the largest fleets were destroyed, the most trusted commanders captured or killed, and the Alphas, for the first time in their history, realized that their empire was crumbling, not because of their enemies' numbers, but because of their own arrogance, underestimating a species they once dismissed as weak, insignificant, and unworthy of notice. And yet, humanity showed no mercy, for mercy had never been part of Alpha history, and they understood that to leave the Alphas alive would mean risk, rebellion, and return. So every battle was fought with the intention to end not just fleets, but the very possibility of Alpha resurgence. By the time the war ended, the galaxy was quiet, the Alphas reduced to shadows of their former selves, their fleets gone, their cities in ruins, their legacy erased, and only the faint whispers of history remained to remind the stars that once there had been rulers so mighty that none dared oppose them, rulers who had been called Alphas, rulers who had believed themselves eternal, rulers who had been brought down not by equal force, but by determination, intelligence, and courage. And they, humans, the species that had once been ignored, weak, and insignificant, now stood at the center of the galaxy, their rise complete, their enemies vanquished, and the lesson clear to all. Arrogance and cruelty cannot withstand a united will, and even the greatest can fall when they refuse to see the storm gathering beyond their sight. And so the fall of the Alphas was not just the end of an empire, but the beginning of a new order, a new era, and a new story in which humanity would write its name across the stars forever. After centuries of ruling the galaxy with fear, after countless planets had burned under their command, after entire civilizations had been crushed beneath their feet, the Alphas were gone, vanished from the stars as if they had never existed, and what remained was a silence so deep that even the void seemed to mourn the end of a power once absolute, for the galaxy had never known such sudden emptiness, such sudden freedom, and humanity, standing at the center of it all, understood the weight of what they had achieved, yet they also understood that history would remember the Alphas not for their cruelty, but for the lessons their fall taught, lessons about arrogance, hubris, and the danger of underestimating those who seem weak. The humans moved carefully through the remnants of Alpha space, surveying the destroyed fleets, the shattered worlds, and the silent cities that once gleamed like stars themselves, and everywhere they went, they saw evidence of a civilization so advanced, so powerful, that it seemed impossible it could be destroyed, yet the destruction was complete, leaving no doubt that even the mightiest can fall, that no empire is eternal, and that determination, courage, and intelligence can triumph over brute strength. Survivors of the Alphas, few and scattered, hid among the ruins, their pride shattered, their fleets gone, their command broken, and they realized for the first time what it meant to be powerless, what it meant to face a species they had dismissed, mocked, and underestimated. And yet humanity, though victorious, did not gloat, for they knew that power was dangerous, that unchecked strength could become tyranny, and that even now, the galaxy watched to see what the humans would do with the lessons of the past. In the aftermath, humanity began to rebuild, to explore the stars not as conquerors but as leaders, using knowledge gained from their enemies, adapting technology from the Alphas, and forging alliances that would prevent the rise of another empire like the one that had ruled with fear for so long. And everywhere humans went, whispers of the Alphas' fall spread, tales of the mighty rulers erased from existence, a warning to all who would seek domination, and a promise that strength alone is never enough. Yet even in silence, the name of the Alphas carried weight, for their legacy was written not in victories, but in lessons, in warnings, and in the reminder that no matter how powerful one becomes, failure is always possible, and the stars, once ruled by terror, now belong to those who had the courage to challenge the impossible, to rise against fear itself, and to change history forever. Humanity's fleets moved through the void, not just as victors, but as witnesses to the end of a legend, and though the galaxy seemed quieter, emptier, it was a quiet that hummed with potential, with the knowledge that the fall of the Alphas was not just the end of their story, but the beginning of many others, stories of new civilizations, new challenges, and new conflicts that would test humanity's strength, wisdom, and will. And every star they passed reminded them of the cost of arrogance, the price of cruelty, and the power of determination, for even the strongest can fall, and even the smallest can rise, and in that balance, the galaxy found its new order, its new rulers, and its new hope, and as humans looked across the silent worlds once dominated by the Alphas, they understood the responsibility of power, the weight of history, and the quiet promise that the lessons of the past would guide the future. For the Alphas would never rise again, their cities would never shine, and their fleets would never return, and yet their story would live on, whispered across the stars, a story of power, pride, fall, and the relentless rise of a species that refused to bow, refused to submit, and refused to be forgotten. And as humanity sailed into the endless darkness, the galaxy watched, knowing that the era of the Alphas had ended, and the era of humans had only just begun, a future built not on fear, but on courage, intelligence, and the understanding that even in silence, the echoes of legends shape the destiny of worlds.